Now let's move on to the next question that I ask you. What if astronauts and spacecraft suffer an accident, or they experience conditions of distress, or make an emergency landing or unintended landing in the territory of another state? So what happens to the astronauts in that case, right? So let's look at the 1968 agreement on the rescue of astronauts, the return of astronauts, and the return of objects launched into outer space. So this is one of the major developments in the sphere of outer space law, and this treaty was drafted by the UN Committee on Outer Space on Rescue of Astronauts. It entered into effect on 3rd December 1968. There are 6 substantive articles in the treaty. One relates to the recovery and the return of artificial space objects. Another one to the inclusion of international agencies as launching authorities affected by the agreement, and the other 4 relate to the rescue and return of astronauts on Earth as well as in space. So this agreement requires that any state party that becomes aware that any astronaut or staff or personnel of spacecraft which is in distress, they must notify the launching authority and the Secretary General of UN. So it makes them duty bound to help them, to notify the launching authority. And it also speaks about providing possible assistance to rescue these people who have landed within the state's territory. So that's the answer to this question, and that is also a very significant question because there have been crash landings and there have been accidents, and this provision can be then invoked to seek help from the parties. Let's move on to the next question that I asked you. Now, what happens if a space vehicle or a space shuttle or a spacecraft causes damage on the surface of Earth or to an aircraft? And to explain this better, I would like to take a real life example. Watch this.
Chernobyl, besides Fukushima, was the worst nuclear incident in the modern history. But did you know that there were 2 more occasions between 1978 and 1983 where a whole city could have become inhabitable? Even worse, nobody knew what continent or what region would be affected. The threat of nuclear debris raining back to Earth was in the news for months and weeks. People in Ireland, Belgium, Germany and other European countries were asked to stay inside the house because of the risk of higher radiation exposure. I remember one of our neighbors taking measurements in our backyard, but the threatening was not coming of a nuclear missile or warhead. It came from space. The name was Cosmos 954 and Cosmos 1402, 2 Soviet low-orbiting spy satellites that got out of control. The Cosmos satellites were part of the program Rossat, an array of Soviet-launched spy sats built to monitor ocean traffic, such as submarines and NATO vessels. What had been kept secret until the incidents was that these satellites were powered by a nuclear reactor. Each satellite carried 110 pounds or 50 kilograms of uranium-235 that was used to power a fission reactor, an experimental lightweight reactor that generated about 3 kilowatts used to power the radar antenna. Cosmos 954 was launched on September 8 in 1977 from Baikonur on a Cyclone 2 carrier rocket and was brought into orbit of only 259 kilometers or 161 miles. In December of 1977, the satellite has deviated from its designed orbit and its flight path was becoming increasingly erratic. Cosmos 954 started to change its altitude up to 50 miles of course. Later that month, the North American Aerospace Defense Command noticed Cosmos 954 abnormal maneuvers. In secret meetings, Soviet officials warned their US counterparts that they had lost control over the vehicle and that the system which was intended to propel the spent reactor core into a safe disposal orbit had failed. On January 24, 1978, Cosmos 954 re-entered the Earth's atmosphere while traveling on a northeastward trek over West Canada. At first, the USSR claimed that the satellite had been completely destroyed during re-entry, but later searches showed debris from the 3.8-ton satellite have been deposited on uninhabited Canadian territory along a 600-mile or 1,000-kilometer path from Great Slave Lake to Baker Lake. It took around 10 months for the Canadian authorities to recover the radioactive debris. They were ultimately able to recover 12 large pieces of the satellite. 10 of the fragments recovered were radioactive. The pieces displayed radioactivity of up to 1.1 sieverts per hour, yet they only comprised an estimated 1% of the fuel. One fragment had a devastating radiation level of 500 Röntgen per hour. Cosmos 954 scattered radioactivity over almost 48,000 square miles, and the USSR had to pay Canada $10 million for the damage.
To deal with the situations like the one you just saw, the 1972 Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects was signed. And this convention was invoked for the first time by Canada as a result of damage claimed by it, which was caused by Soviet Cosmos 954. Right? And then the Soviet Union had to pay a substantial amount of money as compensation to Canada. Now let's move on to the next question. How do we keep track of ever increasing number of artificial objects floating through the space? Well, the answer lies in the 1976 Convention on the Registration of Objects Launched into Outer Space. A main reason for enacting this treaty was ever increasing number of artificial objects floating through space. And there are enormous amount of artificial satellites and different orbits, and at one point it becomes important to provide traceability of these objects that we are putting into outer space. Now let's come to the final question that I asked you. Who owns the moon? And for this, I'd like to tell you a case. In 1953, a lawyer called Yanero Gajardo Vera, he became famous because he claimed the ownership of the moon. He even registered the moon before a notary by a deed. I'll read what the deed read. And I quote, Yanero Gajardo Vera, a lawyer, poet, is the owner from before the year 1857, adding to the possessions of his ancestors, the celestial body and only satellite of the Earth, with a diameter of 3,475.99 kilometers, under the name of Moon, whose boundaries are, due to being a spheroidal body, north, south, east and west, outer space. His place of residence being signed Yanero Gajardo Vera. He was a Chilean lawyer, and following the Chilean laws, he published 3 announcements in the newspapers of Chile. That was a requirement in the Chilean laws at that time. So that's how he went about completing his ownership claim. Interesting, isn't it? There is another story that I want to tell you, and this story is about a man named Dennis Hope. Watch this.
Good afternoon, Lunar Epstein Galactic Government Headquarters. May I help you? Yeah, we actually have been selling property on the moon since 1980. There are some people that are selling properties in outer space that don't own the land. As far as I'm concerned, they're criminal in their intent. The properties that we're currently offering for sale are the moon of Earth, Mars, Venus, Io, and Mercury. If you try and sell something and use deceit, it diminishes you as a human being. This is as real as any other properties you can buy on Earth. I filed a declaration of ownership with the United Nations, otherwise I wouldn't do it. I've grown up with a work ethic that is based in honesty. My parents are both from Oklahoma. I've just always had this honesty quirk about me. In 1980, I was going through a divorce and hadn't worked in almost a year. And I was almost out of money. I was trying to think what would really make me happy. And I thought if I had some property, I could mortgage it and move to Los Angeles and get an acting career going. And when I had that thought, I looked out the window and saw the moon and thought to myself, there's a lot of property. And almost instantly, I remembered studying a brand new 1967 Outer Space Treaty.
Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 states, no nation by appropriation shall have sovereignty or control over any of the satellite bodies. Nowhere in the Outer Space Treaty does it mention anything about individuals. This is the loophole that gave me the impetus to file a claim of ownership for the moon. Then I sent a note to the United Nations stating that if they had a legal problem with my claim of ownership, to please let me know. And on that note, I've never heard from them.
We've sold just under 600 million acres on the moon so far, and that's growing by about 200 properties per day. The property itself, regardless of which properties we sell you, are all the same price. They're $19.99 plus a $1.51 lunar or planetary tax, $2.50 to print the name on the document. So the total would be $24. We have 5,740,000 individual property owners in 193 countries on planet Earth. 2 on the moon and 1 on Mars. Okay. The average sale that we make is 2.2 properties per person. Summer gifts, we know that 17% of the people that buy land from us buy it for its novelty idea. And the word novelty, just so people know, in the American Heritage Dictionary says it's a small item that has a quality of being unique. If this doesn't fall into that category and that definition, I don't know what does. It doesn't have anything to do with its value. All of the red areas here are areas that we've already sold. The staff would ask me, we're out of properties, we need to select another area, we've just sold that one out. Where do you want to do it? And so I just cover my eyes and go like this. There's just under 10 billion acres on the moon.
And everything you haven't sold belongs to you?
Yes. I'm actually the wealthiest individual on the planet, in theory. These 3 renditions that are on the wall here, this was our concept of what we thought the lunar embassy would look like on the moon initially. It seemed to make sense for us at that time because it's celestial looking, but it doesn't house enough people for us. And it won't be large enough to create a city atmosphere that we're looking for. So then we decided that the best way to do this would be to create the 4-sided pyramid. We don't have any architectural drawings done yet. We don't have anything other than a basic drawing. The pyramid that we're building will have embassies for every government on this planet, including some of the non-Earth-based governments that we are in touch with occasionally, which I can't speak about too much, but they are here, they are in existence, and they'll have embassies there as well. Owning the moon is very interesting. It's a tremendous burden in some respects to keep everybody happy. You can't.
I know I have detractors. I know I have people that have said you can't do this. Some of them are vehement about it. I've been called a crook, a fraud, a scam artist. I've never seen myself that way at all.
And it's not that I'm the brightest person in the block or anything like that. It's just that I had an idea and I've followed through for the last 30 years. Interesting story, in 1999, a person by the name of Verigalu Pop emailed me and told me that he had claimed ownership to the sun and that he was charging me $30 million a year for the energy put out for all the planetary bodies that I owned. I waited a couple of days and wrote back to him and said, we've decided we don't want your energy, please turn it off. Okay, Ron, I've got all the information. I appreciate the call, and your order will be mailed out tomorrow and you'll have it in about 7 days. Thank you very much. Enjoy the property. Have a great day.
I've always looked at myself as a pioneer. I've always thought differently.
I think outside the box. Actually, now I'm thinking outside the planet. I think what the Lunar Embassy deeds provide for people is hope. If people own land, you have a good feeling about the fact that you're an accomplished person, you're successful. And even if you own the land on the moon, the opportunity to think maybe someday, maybe I won't make it, maybe my kids won't make it, but maybe my grandkids will be able to go up there and utilize the property.
So here lies the question. How can a man register moon in his own name? And how can another man sell property on the moon? Right? So these questions again can be looked at from the perspective of Outer Space Treaty and the interpretation where it says no space can be appropriated privately. But that was not explicitly said. As you remember, that was a result of interpretation of the Outer Space Treaty. A more specific treaty on moon and other celestial bodies was signed in 1979. That is also commonly referred to as the Moon Treaty. We are not supposed to go into the detail of Moon Treaty, but I'll just tell you in brief what Moon Treaty is. Basically, the Moon Treaty upholds and elaborates on many provisions of the Outer Space Treaty. So it specifically applies to moon and other celestial bodies in solar system, excluding the Earth. It provides that these bodies should be exclusively used for peaceful purposes and their environment should not be disrupted, and that United Nations should be informed of the location and purpose of any station established in these bodies. The Moon Treaty also closes this gap which is there in the Outer Space Treaty by expressly banning any ownership of any extraterrestrial property by any organization or private person. Another section in the Moon Treaty states that moon and its natural resources are common heritage of mankind and harvesting of these resources is not allowed except through an internationally agreed regime. But the thing is, not many states have ratified the Moon Treaty. You can see here on the map which states have ratified it. So let's come to this man, Dennis Hope. Dennis Hope filed a claim to the ownership of the moon with the United States government. Ever since he filed that claim, he started selling plots of the lunar property to individuals, and in return he would also give a kind of a certificate of ownership, right? So he started a real estate business based on this claim, and he made a lot of money in this business. Now the legitimacy of his title to moon is questionable, right? Despite he being very confident that his claim is valid and legal, the legitimacy is questioned because his claim is never been formally rejected by the United States government. Probably you can say that the United States has not yet bothered to reject his claim because they don't want to give a tacit recognition to the fact that private ownership of moon is not possible. There are a lot of vested interests in private ownership of moon or private use of moon because many companies see a possibility of some kind of exploration, some kind of use to the resources of the moon or other celestial bodies. So that's the reason many states have not ratified it, and US has not formally rejected Dennis Hope's claim. So as of now, the Moon Treaty remains a failed piece of international legislation, but still these states, many states have not ratified Moon Treaty. Most of them, they have ratified the Outer Space Treaty, and as of now the moon and other celestial body continue to be regulated by the Outer Space Treaty. So that brings us to an end of discussion in this class on the outer space. The two videos that I have posted on outer space are meant to be only introductory videos. It just tells you some questions and just tells you which treaty you can look at to answer that question. It just gives a bird's eye view of the international law regime of outer space, and there's no scope for further discussion of outer space law in this course. So I hope those of you who have watched these videos will find avenues that you are interested in and you can pursue that further. With this, I'd like to end today's class. Thank you.